Hi guys, my name is Ashley Ridenauer and I will be demonstrating sixth grade standard ratios and proportions 6.1, and this is going to benefit me because although I've taught this before, I will be teaching it in a self-contained classroom this year, so it's good to go back and reflect. Um, the routine that I am going to focus on today is actually going to be using not only academic language but also using an anchor chart. I feel like anchor charts are very solid when it comes to having that foundation of starting a new subject, especially since you can start out with a very basic slate and then you can excel and build on top of that, and you can always go back for reference. So I've always really enjoyed using anchor charts, and I just did a really simple one to represent the standard I am working on. So again, I am doing 6.RP1, which is ratios and proportions. I'm going to focus on just the startup of this section of mathematics. So the quoted area from the Common Core State Standards of 6.RPA.1 is understand the concept of a ratio and use ratio language to describe a ratio relationship between two quantities. And the example they give is the ratio of wings to beak in a birdhouse at the zoo was 2 to 1, because for every 2 wings there was 1 beak. So for every vote candidate A received, candidate C received nearly 3 votes. So this is the anchor chart that I came up with. It is very basic, very simply laid out. What I would do actually is I wouldn't start out with any of that. All I would do is have ratio, and then a ratio is a comparison of two quantities. So that's where it brings up the whole idea of using mathematic language. We're not saying two numbers or two things, we are actually using the terms quantities. And by introducing that, the students recall this and they start thinking, well, what was a quantity before? You can do some spiral review if you need to. Maybe give them, have them give them a thumbs up or a thumbs down if they remember what it is. And you can even ask one of the students if they would like to explain what a quantity is, or just have them do a really quick math talk with their partner or their table, like 10 seconds tops. So if we were to start out with this, I would have the shapes. I like to do mine as individual colors because brighter the better. So what I did is I just created the circles, the triangles, and the squares. Just some really basic shapes. I didn't want to do anything too fancy. And then I would probably start out with this first as how they would write it. So x2y, x:y, and x over y. So they're gonna probably identify this one right away and they'll say, oh, well, that's a fraction. Well, now it's a ratio. So they're identifying fractions right now, and now what they are going to start doing is seeing it as a ratio as well. So it makes them more cognitive of that idea, and then we can move on. Also, I would like to tell them that we have a new word, and that's terms. So when we are identifying quantities in mathematics, we're now calling them terms. Again, we're not calling them numbers or letters, we're calling them terms, we're calling them variables, we're calling them quantities, and that is really important. So this would be something that I would also introduce at the beginning of a lesson before we really jumped out into it. So some of these words, again, they will recall and some they will not. But I would introduce that area first, and then I would probably show them the different ways of identifying parts to parts and then parts to whole. And I would do this alone. As you can see, I didn't finish that one, my bad. But this would actually be triangles to total shapes. So I noticed last year a big issue that the students had was that they would just pick a random, they would have the problem, but they wouldn't follow it exactly that it needed to be. So with ratios, it's really important that they recall or realize that it has to be exactly written in that order. So that would be something to really look at. Sorry, I just hit my dog. So part to part, we're talking about squares to circles. So they would need to see it as 2 to 4. If they saw it as 4 to 2, that would be identifying that there are, it is 4 to 2. But they would be identifying as 2 to 4. So no, there are not 2 squares and 4 circles. So they need to know the order and how to arrange that. So this would be something to do at the beginning of the lesson again. You can make it entertaining. You can have them do their own anchor charts. I like the idea of 2 wings to 1 beak. Very simple. And then you could start doing random things in the classroom. So you can say how many shoes to student ratio. Obviously there are 2 shoes to 1 person, but if there are 19 kids in the classroom, you're making them recall multiplication, making sure that they know how to write it out, and making sure that they are aware that it is not, you're not asking for person to shoe, you are asking for shoe to person. So I really like the idea of anchor charts. Again, this is just a really simplified version that I did on a piece of computer paper, but it's really useful because you can go back and you can do spiral review and share with the kids, have them recall things, especially when it gets to more complicated ideas, like in the 7th grade. This is what they start out with, ratios and proportions. And even when they get on to 8th grade and the end of 7th grade, when they're doing slope intervals. So they're going to have to realize that, the rise over run, they're going to see it as a fraction, but be like, hey guys, remember it's also a ratio. So we have to do one before the other. We have to go, up before we can go over. So rise over run, top number and bottom number. So these are really good ideas that I like. And this can be something that is done on a daily basis, weekly basis. Anchor charts don't necessarily have to be only for teaching the lesson. You can have them do presentations. You can even have them do math talks on them. You can have them do their review and maybe even their exit ticket to be a part of the anchor chart system. So that is my routine that I like. It's something that I feel all students can really benefit from, and something that I really suggest trying in your classroom. And if you mess up the first time, that's okay, because the whole part of this is trial and error. I mess up all the time in front of my students. That does not make me a bad teacher. I admit my mistake, and I feel like that's also really encouraging and refreshing for the kids, because they realize that Mrs. R isn't always right. And it also makes them feel more comfortable to try new things. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video and you try using anchor charts this year. So best of luck. Thank you guys.